أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. وسلم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين، وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمد رسول الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، خاتم الرسل والأنبياء أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين، وعلى من اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحان الله العلي العظيم. سبحان الله نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستجيره ونستنصره، فإنه حقا من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. اللهم يا رحمن يا رحيم، اللهم يا منان يا وهاب يا رزاق يا فتاح يا عليم. اللهم إنا نبتهل إليك ونرجوك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها يا رب العالمين. There is this always persistent challenge in trying to think through the challenges that in turn confront us as Muslims, and with every fiber of your being and every conviction within you and every sense of awareness about Islam and what Islam is, it is as if you are a privy to a truth that hands you the key to enlightenment, the key that opens all the doors in the life that we know. You are handed that key that is supposed to give you access to every part of our living existence. That key is the key of Islam. Once you see the truth, once you know the truth, once you know that the religions that have engaged human beings on this earth, many of these religions have aspired towards monotheism, but ultimately failed to achieve it. Religions that deified human beings, religions that in often thoroughly non-rigorous or thoroughly unrigorous intellectual ways have accepted the idea that a human being can be the object of deification, and that a human being can be worshipped by fellow human beings. Whether takes the form of ancestral worship or takes the form of a mythology of Trinity, or takes the form of human beings that are inexplicably semi-gods or demigods. Once you realize that there is really one and only one religion on the face of this earth that anchored itself in monotheism and managed to stem and defeat the various corruptions of polytheistic belief in its many forms and many shapes, that escaped the stinge of the idea of a chosen people or a chosen race or a chosen group. There is no religion before the Islamic revelation, and I'm not including, for instance, religions like Baha'ism, which was born after Islam and which was deeply influenced by Islam. Without Islam, there would have been no Baha'i faith. But even, and we don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of this, but even the Baha'i faith, although it took from Islam its monotheism, ultimately it was not able to preserve it and protect it in its unadulterated form because of its desire, or the desire of its founder, to be all-inclusive and to embrace all truth. And in embracing all truth, you end up adopting and believing in practically none at all. The enlightenment of Islam that gives you a key that is supposed to translate Allah's words to us. When in Surah Al-A'raf, when Allah reminds us that at heart and core, what Allah has permitted to us through the vehicle of Islam, Allah has facilitated to us, made allowable and permissible to us, is this fascinating word or fascinating expression, الطيبات. Allah has allowed every طيب, الطيبات من الرزق. And in the same surah, Surah Al-A'raf, what Allah prohibits is al-fawahish. الطيبات is everything that is clean, pure, good. And al-fawahish is everything that is obscene, unhealthy, wrongful. The key that Allah gave us through Islam and through that conviction and that belief that with this key you have access to al-tayyibat min al-rizq, all that is good. And with this key, you can steer away and you can isolate yourself from, you can avoid in every diligent way al-fawahish, what is obscene, what is impure, what is wrongful. A remarkably liberating concept. If you truly internalize the belief, then it is an idea you are embracing, what literally delivers air to your lungs and to your heart and to your very soul through your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through being the follower of the only legitimate monotheism in the universe. You are handed over a license for everything that is pure and good, and is strict refrain and command to steer away from everything that is impure, not good, and ugly. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly tells the followers of this faith that Allah has taken you out of darkness unto light. If further underscoring, put differently, if Islam to you is not an empowerment of liberation, but not liberation to indulge in a hedonistic, like the satanic maxim or the satanic principle, do as you will. This is the famous principle of, what's his name, the famous British satanic fellow, Aleister Crowley. Whenever you encounter anything that likes to claim to be a negation of religiosity, their first founding principle is do as you will. Well, in Islam's empowerment, it is not do as you will, but do what is good, what is fundamentally moral, what is truly beautiful, and avoid and steer away from the opposite. But the picture for modern Muslims gets complicated fairly quickly. The Islam that we inherit is not just the Islam that is communicated to us through the words of the Quran, but even the words of the Quran have reached us, attached to them a historical legacy. But the entire precedent of the Prophet ﷺ and the disciples of the Prophet ﷺ and any of the well-known followers of the legacy of the Prophet ﷺ are interlinked with a historical legacy. You can't get around this, because anything that comes from the past attached to the thing is history. The very memory of your yesteryears is complicated by history. Although you yourself lived through your own childhood, the memories of your own personal childhood is not some objective thing that you retain in your intellect. It is a complicated thing that is contextualized and situated in your own history. So much so that you cannot even recall your yesteryears without its inextricable historical legacy, historical attachment. So can you imagine then, when this history is not even the life that you personally lived, but the history of numerous individuals that lived centuries ago, century upon century upon century, that are interconnected and interlinked and thoroughly wedded and embedded in the system of belief that you inherit. So Allah tells us, as a Muslim, what Allah empowers you with is at-tayyibat min al-rizq, all that is good and all that is beautiful. And what Allah commands you to do is to steer away from the fawahish, all that is ugly. But if you take this text and ignore the historical context, if you thoroughly ignore the historical context, you have plunged head on into an irreconcilable and irresolvable contradiction. The very reason you have that text is because it was preserved and remembered by history. So if you try to pretend that I'm going to take the text and thoroughly ignore history, you've plunged into a contradiction, because you've taken a text as if you are capable of taking a text without its attendant history. But on the other hand, if you take the history without discernment, without scrutiny, without intelligence, if you take the text with all its contextual, historical underpinnings, you might very well end up lost in the details and in the numerous obscurities and vagaries of history, so much so that the text itself no longer has a normative impact beyond the history that it delivers. Take one example. Recently, I said in a khutbah that all human beings, all human societies, throughout history, where history in its many different contexts and many different settings, you will not find a society that did not express itself in art, and in this khutbah I mentioned music in particular. And I said that any religion that attempts to go against and be at odds with human nature, for instance, by prohibiting music, will end up defeating itself. I was told that some people responded to this by the typical knee-jerk reaction of, oh, this is very dangerous. Well, sex is a natural human desire too, so are we saying sex is completely allowed? Now, of course, just in passing, obviously, the people who are making these remarks are not very analytical thinkers, because Islam didn't prohibit or ban sex. Islam regulated sex. Islam said there is a proper context and a proper channel for sex. In the same way that the difference between regulating music and banning and prohibiting music. But this is just a, off the cuff, by the way type of observation. But my point is a much larger one and a much more serious one. Go back to الطيبات من الرزق. What Allah tells us was handed over to you in possessing this key, the key of Islam, the only real monotheism, the religion of all the prophets, from Ibrahim alayhi salam to Musa alayhi salam to Isa alayhi salam, the only religion, the only faith that rejects the logic of anyone sacrificing for the sins of another, the only faith that tells us do not apply human logic to understanding the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The religion that in every sense taught us not to think of God in human terms, because creation is far greater and far more dazzling than we can ever imagine. The only religion, when we learn that the universe had a beginning, and anything that has a beginning will have an end. So the very universe, all the stars, all the galaxies, science confirms the fact that this entire universe, because it began, because it has a starting point, it will have a point of extinction. All this universe, with all the galaxies, all the planets, all the stars, even with all the black holes, have a date with death. And imagine, so if this entire universe, with all its galaxy, all its majesty, is going to die in the same way that it was born, all indicators, then doesn't that necessarily tell you of a greater reality, a more lasting reality, and a more eternal reality than this entire universe that we live in? And the only religion where you can make sense of the idea that this entire universe will expire and will end, and it not challenging the premises of the very faith, is Islam. It doesn't work with Christianity. It doesn't work with Judaism. It doesn't work with Buddhism. It doesn't work with Hinduism. Because all these religions are vested in the created world, and in every sense cannot go beyond it. But Islam does. Because of the Quran, because the Quran does. Okay. But what if the example of the music, as an illustrative example? I have no interest in convincing you whether music is halal or haram. If you don't want to listen to music, fine. That's your business, between you and Allah. But it is a very good example of how the words can become weighed down and interlinked with history itself. So Allah tells us everything that is good, that is beautiful, الطيبات من الرزق, is Allah not just allowed you, but Allah affirmatively urges you to pursue all that is beautiful and all that is good. And in this example, a Muslim comes along and says, yes, but the historical context teaches us that music is haram. And then you say, well, what historical context? And the most typical response you get is the opinion attributed to Ibn Mas'ud, one of the earliest authorities on Islamic law. The opinion attributed to Ibn Mas'ud that when Allah refers to the Quran, when Allah tells us, commands us in the Quran to avoid lahw al-hadith. Lahw al-hadith means nonsense, to avoid engaging in nonsensical talk. But lahw al-hadith even goes beyond that with the clear connotation of forms of conversation or talk that are harmful. People point to the opinion attributed to Ibn Mas'ud in saying that lahw al-hadith means when God said, do not engage in vain talk or nonsensical talk or harmful speech, that what Allah was talking about, lahw al-hadith, meant music. That's an opinion attributed to Ibn Mas'ud. The problem, to even more precisely, they say that نزلت في المعازف, that it was referring to instruments of music. And this report, which attributes this opinion to Ibn Mas'ud, is in the all-famous Bukhari. Bukhari himself said that the hadith which attributes this opinion to Ibn Mas'ud is mu'allaq, meaning it has missing links, or a missing link, particularly a missing link to the Prophet ﷺ. So in other words, it's a defective hadith. But Bukhari included it in his text but didn't have time or died before verifying its authenticity. People that came after Bukhari claimed that they verified the authenticity of that tradition using Bukhari's methodology. So muhaddithun that came after Bukhari said, yeah, well, Bukhari didn't die before attesting to the authenticity of this hadith or this tradition, this khabar. But we, following Bukhari's methodology, authenticated the hadith. The problem is the complexity of history and the complexity of the historical context. Because at the same time that we have the attribution to Ibn Mas'ud, there are ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ clearly uses lahu al-hadith, clearly interprets that same expression, nonsensical talk, vain talk, to give it a meaning that has nothing to do with music. But beyond that, numerous narratives, including the well-known narrative that Abu Bakr walks into the home of the Prophet ﷺ and finds two girls singing and playing music and attempts to stop them by telling them, quit that. And the Prophet ﷺ responding by saying, leave them. It is inconceivable, of course, that Ibn Mas'ud would know something that the Prophet ﷺ didn't know. And the context seems to indicate that Abu Bakr attempted to stop the girls not because music was haram, but out of respect for the Prophet. And typical of the Prophet ﷺ, responded by, leave people. It's okay. They don't have to show me reverence by censoring themselves. But the record doesn't even stop there. There are numerous traditions that Abdullah ibn Ja'far, Imam Ali's son, not only listened to music, but actually composed the music and played instruments and would give his compositions to singers to sing. And this is Ali's son, Abdullah ibn Ja'far. That the historical record goes on beyond that, that not just Ali's son, but Abdullah ibn Umar, Umar's son. We have a number of reports in which he listens to music or plays a role in the performance of music. We have the same reports about Uthman. We have the same reports about Abdullah ibn Auf. We have the same reports about Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah. And of the generation of Ibn Mas'ud, although this opinion was attributed to Ibn Mas'ud, we have reports of the earliest jurists like Sa'id ibn Musayyab, Ata ibn Rabah, Imam al-Zuhri, Imam al-Shu'bi, all of the opinion that what was attributed to Ibn Mas'ud is inauthentic, incorrect, and that music is not haram. And this is why Ibn Hazm, centuries later, or Ibn Abi Dunya, centuries later, or even later still, Imams like Shukani, who wrote a famous treatise on challenging the presumed consensus against music, or Imam Abdul Ghani al-Nabulsi, leave alone even later jurists like al-Qaradawi or Muhammad al-Ghazali or Muhammad Imara or others, all of the opinion that none of the reports, including that rather infamous hadith that whoever listens to music will come in the hereafter and I don't know what will be poured in their ears, that's clearly an inauthentic hadith. No one ever claimed it was authentic. But generations of scholars have said anyone that claims that there is an ijma' or a clear opinion prohibiting music doesn't know what they're talking about. Ibn Hazm, who is known as a literalist and a strict constructionist, said explicitly, if there were any clear evidence that it's haram, I would happily embrace it. But none of the evidence about its purported hurmah stands up to scrutiny. And he's right. But you have even people in Islamic history, like the famous Al-Ghazali, Hamid Al-Ghazali, who even went further and said, whoever is not moved by music, not just listens to music, but whoever is not moved by music, fasid and masaj, something is wrong with their intuitive nature. Now, but Muslims, despite the complexity of the historical context, love to spew what they don't know. And there is even a more serious methodological issue and a methodological question. In light of the fact that all text reaches us with embedded in a historical context, historical complexity, how do we navigate these waters? What do we do about this complexity? Allah's message has to be effective and compelling for every day and age. Now, with historical complexity, you can choose to be a specialist who actually deals with this historical complexity. But if so, that means you will commit your life to scholarship. No one who has not committed their entire life to taking history seriously, to understanding the vagaries and nuances of history, anyone that commits to that means they're committing their entire life to scholarship, because nothing short of their entire life will do. Nothing short of their entire life will do. Part of the problem with so-called Muslim scholars of today is that they think they can access the Quran and access the Sunnah without being experts in analyzing history. It doesn't work anymore. You cannot say, if you are a scholar, the basis of my opinions are the Quran and Sunnah, unless you have a full competence with the tools necessary to analyzing the history that comes with. Now, but if you are not in a position to commit your entire life to scholarship, then what is your primary duty? Your primary duty is to take Allah's words not at face value, but at rational value. So when you read Allah saying, with this religion, I empowered you over all that is good, or with all that is good, and with this religion, I steer you away from all that is bad. Your charge as a lay Muslim is to carry God's message and revelation, to deliver, to embody God's message and revelation anchored in reason and rationality. You are not a historical expert. Don't pretend to be a historical expert. You don't have the training or knowledge or time or resources. But it is absolutely incumbent upon you that when the non-Muslim comes, what the non-Muslim encounters, you who are now a representative, whether you like it or not, of Islam and the enlightenment of Islam, what you say and do on behalf of Islam has to pass the test of reasonability. What you say and do must make sense. Otherwise, you embody a corruption of God's message. And if what you say and do doesn't make sense, not within the historical context of the people that you know nothing about or near nothing about, those who died centuries ago, or those who even died 20 years ago, you're a lay person. Be humble enough to recognize it, admit it, embrace it, own it. Scholars in our days, true scholars, are rare and few in between. Knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah is no longer adequate. To be a real scholar, you need the analytical tools that leave history, that give you a clear command over the vagaries and challenges of history. But you as a Muslim, you must be the living example of Allah's luminosity. And Allah's luminosity is not exhibited by communicating a medieval past, nor is it exhibited by communicating what you cannot defend rationally and what you cannot explain reasonably. So does it matter? Yes. Music is a very good example. I can make a reasonable, rational argument Why music that teaches people to be pimps, to control the whole, to commit assault, to curse and swear and articulate, express obscenities, I can make a very rational, reasonable argument as a layperson why this music is fahisha, is ugly and wrong. But can I make a reasonable argument that Mozart, Beethoven, the majestic music of Sibelius, his violin concerto, something that you literally elevates you to heights of spirituality, that Brahms concerto, Liszt's piano music, Chopin's piano music, can I make a rational, enlightened, reasonable argument why this is ugly and prohibited? Well, I would like to see someone try. If you cannot make such an argument, then at a minimum, if you insist that this is your belief, at a minimum, keep your mouth shut. Then do what you believe. But if you are unable to defend the rational and reasonable in Islam, then keep your mouth shut. The lay Muslim is charged with intuitive reasonability, with intuitive beauty. What they must exhibit and reflect to humanity is what is reasonable and what is beautiful. Not to pretend to be learned. They are not even obligated to present the complexities of hadith literature and sunnah literature because they can't navigate it. They have no command over it. People, when somehow our institutions of real learning crumbled, and what used to be the purview, what used to be a normal social ethic, that law is for the truly specialized. That law is such an honorable specialty that the most among them, or what used to be the most difficult academic training, was medicine and law in Islamic history. What required the most number of years and the greatest number of hours to specialize in and to qualify in were the fields of medicine and law. Colonialism came and medicine sort of retained its status. Law crumbled in the doldrums. But when that happened, law became the claim of the dunces of the world. Every dunce claimed to be a legal expert. The problem, though, is when every dunce speaks about what they do not know and represent at-tayyibat min al-rizq to be whatever impressionistic understanding they have of the historical legacy, in which they often are expressing their frustration and their feelings of disempowerment by making people's life more difficult and making Islam more and more of an exclusive club of absurdities. What got lost is Allah's rational and beautiful and intuitive message to claim the future of Islam. That's what we must claim. That's what we must regain. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه يا رب العالمين. Every week I struggle with the layers of ugliness that plague the Muslim world. In news article that comes out about how China is wrecking and destroying historical mosques that have been there for hundreds of years, and China destroys them with hardly a peep from anyone other than some international UN bodies and human rights organizations. The articles that came out about the incredibly racist and degrading incident in which Pakistan, right or wrong, takes a position that it believes is consistent with its own interests in refusing to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the United States simply, like the United States has been doing with the militaries of so many third world countries, simply tells the Pakistani military, oust Imran Khan for daring to say no to us. And the Pakistani military duly does so. We all know that whether it's the Libyan military, Egyptian military, Jordanian military, Moroccan military, Tunisian military, Algerian military, Sudanese military, oh my Lord, I can keep going on and on. All of them repress Muslims on behalf of Western countries collectively or one Western country or another. All of them. Their prisons are packed with Islamic activists. Why? Because their Western masters keep them in power to perform this proxy role of suppressing Muslim organizations and Muslim activists and Muslim thinkers and Muslim intellectuals everywhere in the Muslim world. I look at a news story that talks about the rise of burnings of Quran in Europe and talks about how historically genocides and holocausts have gone hand in hand with book burnings. Historically, and that is quite true, it is as if you break the psychological bond that restrains you from assaulting a people by burning their texts. And the article talks about how it's very alarming, because if we're burning the Quran in this European country and that European country, it is a prelude to saying you are an evil people that follow an evil book. And today we burn your book, tomorrow we burn you. I even read an article that talked about how, and I want to find this quote because it's worth it takes too much time to find it. Anyway. But basically, it was talking about how, as Trump visited India and held talks with Modi, at the very moment that Trump was praising Modi of India, Muslims were being brutalized in the streets. They were being assaulted, murdered, burned, and raped. And it wasn't even something. Apparently, Trump was informed that this is going on, but it absolutely made no difference. Every week, I get a stack this thick of Palestinians killed by Israel, settlers attacking Palestinian communities. This week, a former Israeli general compares the treatment of Palestinians in Israel to Nazi Germany and describes their treatment as an apartheid. 700 Israeli academics do what academics in the United States would do not dare do, but 700 academics in Israel wrote a statement describing Israel's treatment of Palestinians as apartheid and as racist and criminal. But most of all, the pictures of Palestinian kids every single week killed by Israelis. And then I pause. The leader of the free world meeting with the fascist of the world, one of the fascists of the world, Modi, praising him as Muslims are being butchered in the streets and raped and assaulted. Human Rights Watch came out, actually it was Amnesty, sorry. Amnesty just came out with a damning report about human rights violations by Indian forces against Muslims in Kashmir. Hardly worth a note anywhere. What do you do with this picture? It is not, the issue is not that all of this is occurring. The issue is the attention of Muslims is elsewhere. That in the midst of this misery, you have Muslims who call jihad to insist that music is haram. that in the midst of this misery, the best funded Muslim organization sits on the margins and says, it's fine. It's Allah's will. Don't object. Don't protest. We have lost our connection to Allah's pristine and primordial calling, to our conscience. أُحِلَّ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ. What Allah gives you through Islam is all that is beautiful and good. That primordial, natural connection. We got lost in the weeds of history, in the wild and crazy weeds and the complexity of history. In short, we must reclaim our reasonability. We must reclaim our rationality. We must reclaim our very humanity to truly represent and embody Allah's message to humanity. Allahumma ighfir lana. Allahumma afu anna. Allahumma arhamna ya Rabbal Alameen. Allahumma tub alayna. Allahumma hdina li aqraba min hadha rashada. Allah, forgive our sins. Empower us to be better Muslims, to be beautiful Muslims, to be rational Muslims, to be reasonable Muslims, to represent the reasonability and rationality and beauty of Islam to humanity at large. And let us not lose our way. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وآله وصحبه وأقم الصلاة.